All of a sudden, I've been fooling around, my fiance's been fooling around with a lot of different sex partners. All of a sudden, we walk down an aisle, and we say, I do. And all of a sudden, we're trying to build a trust relationship, a loyal relationship. But we both know the history of the other, that we really like to play the field. But now we're making a commitment to each other. And now we're trying to trust each other.
Yeah.
See the problem?
Because you're a part of a certain belief system, that belief system doesn't allow you to be an independent thinker. You're always going to have these belief systems clashing. You can't, it's hard to change your mind on certain issues when everything, when they all are tied into your one belief.
Sir, that is true for every single one of us. The law of non-contradiction applies in the East, in the West, to every agnostic, every atheist, every theist. A and non-A cannot both be true in the same way at the same time. The law of non-contradiction. So if you're an atheist, if you're an agnostic, if you're a Christian, if you're a Jew, if you're a hedonist, if you're Hugh Hefner in the Playboy philosophy, if you're Shirley MacLaine, we all, when we contradict, obviously, we disagree.
Yeah.
So now, what's your point?
Well, my point is, you're right, but that's with people, with religious people.
No, that's with atheists and agnostics and naturalists and playboys and hedonists and narcissists, materialists, capitalists, Republicans, Democrats. When you make a statement, this is the way it is, that means that which contradicts your statement is wrong.
Okay, if there's an error in my textbook,
yeah?
I can explain to you the error. I can explain to you if it's a calculus textbook. I can tell you, oh no, this, I can show you why it's wrong and crunch out some calculations. If on the other, if you go to the Bible and you look at other things like, yeah, how can you argue to me like which ones are right and which ones are wrong? Because you have to take those on faith, whereas like I take things on reason, right?
Wrong.
Okay, then how do you go about deciding which parts of the Bible are right and which ones are wrong?
Well, first of all, we're going to deal with this issue of how do we take things?
Yeah.
You take things as an agnostic on faith.
No.
You have a worldview. Sir, you cannot prove agnosticism. Agnosticism is a faith position.
I'm not trying to prove agnosticism. I'm just saying.
I know you're not.
Yeah.
You can't prove agnosticism. It's impossible. You have faith that agnosticism is an accurate picture of reality. I have faith that Jesus Christ has an accurate picture of reality. We have two faiths. Guess what? Every atheist has faith that their view of reality is correct. They can't prove it. They have faith. Everybody has faith. Now, the question for us thinking human beings who appreciate reason is, here's the question. What is the evidence that your worldview, I don't care if it's atheist, agnostic, Christian, Muslim, what's the evidence that your worldview is accurate? That it tells you the truth about reality? That's the question you guys got to ask. It's a question I got to ask every day. What's the evidence that Jesus Christ's description of reality is correct? What's the evidence that Hugh Hefner's description of the purpose of life is correct? What's the evidence that the capitalist view of reality, that you guys are here for one purpose, to position yourself to get the highest paying job possible? Why? Because the purpose of life is to make money. That's faith, sir. You can't prove that to anybody. So the question is the same question for every Christian, Jew, agnostic, atheist, materialist, hedonist, and that question is, what is the evidence that your worldview is an accurate description of reality?
All right.
It's that simple.
No, that was awesome. Like, I actually
Thank
agree
you.
with everything you said there. You're a good speaker.
Thank
and
you.
that sounds that sounds really nice, but what happens when you get down to practical issues?
It's very, very simple. The question is there a purpose to human sexuality, or is human sexuality a cosmic accident? If human sexuality is a cosmic accident, it doesn't matter what you do sexually.
Yeah.
Totally relative, totally subjective. You can have sex with your dog, with 25 women, 50 men. It really doesn't matter. Okay? because it's all relative. But if there is a God who has created our sexuality, and if he created our sexuality for a purpose, then it would behoove every single one of us to find out what is the purpose for which he created our sexuality. That is obviously where Muhammad, the Torah, the Vedas and Upanishads, the New Testament kick in, claiming this is why we have our sexuality. And obviously the Bible insists that God gave us our sexuality for the purpose of one man making a lifelong commitment to one woman, and within that context enjoying sex as a gift from God. To rip sex out of that context is to trivialize yourself, your sex partner. It is to devalue someone and to treat them as a Barbie doll or as a stud. And Jesus Christ says, guess what? People are not Barbie dolls, they're not studs. They're human beings created in the image of God with personality. We can make a commitment to each other, and it's within the context of that lifelong commitment that we're to enjoy sex as a gift from God. Okay, how do you feel if your mother's sleeping around with a bunch of different men?
I probably wouldn't like that, but
why not?
I know she wouldn't do that, and I know my dad wouldn't cheat on her either.
Okay, why are you grateful for that?
Well, that's a really complicated question. I don't want to go off too much.
Really complicated question.
But it creates, but like you said, like eventually it does allow for, you know, a greater bond. I do agree with you there, but that's later in their life. They got married when they're 30. I'm still 21. Like, they got married when they're 30, and yeah, and it's good because they are able to create a stronger emotional bond. And they're able to raise children better. It's more stable. It's a more stable system.
Yep. Good. Now, all of a sudden, I've been fooling around. My fiance's been fooling around with a lot of different sex partners. All of a sudden, we walk down an aisle, and we say, I do. And all of a sudden, we're trying to build a trust relationship, a loyal relationship. But we both know the history of the other, that we really like to play the field. But now we're making a commitment to each other. And now we're trying to trust each other.
Yeah.
See the problem?
Well,
if my history is playing the field, what on earth gives her the confidence that I'm going to stop playing the field?
Well, me personally, I'm probably not going to go for a girl who I've known has played in the field a lot.
Whoa! Oh, baby, I like where this one's going. All right, explain that one. Booyah. So you can play the field, but she can't, right? Here we go. Thanks for your honesty, man. That was well put. Because you weren't just speaking for yourself, you were speaking for a lot of guys, obviously. So it's just fine for me to go out and play the field. But when I marry her, she better not be that type of person.
I think the important thing is if you do have an open relationship, then the important thing is just to be honest, to say straight up that, you know, hey, I'm not looking for a close relationship. And if everybody's honest with each other, nothing bad can come out of it. If she's honest with me, nothing can go wrong.
Good. Okay, well, I love the honesty of a student I got to talk to at the University of Florida down in Gainesville. This guy steps out of the crowd and he says, now, Cliff, you got to understand, I really love my girlfriend. She really loves me. We're not married. We have sex all the time. There's nothing wrong with that. I said, well, man, it's outstanding to hear that you really love her. Tell me about it. He waxed poetic for a couple of minutes. I interrupted him and said, one question. Tonight she's involved in a car accident and her beautiful face and her beautiful body is totally rearranged and scarred by the car wreck. Will you still love her tomorrow? And the guy was brutally honest. He said, no way, man. If her face is totally rearranged in a car wreck tonight, I'm going to ditch her and go out and get some other fox. I said, okay, now let me ask you a second question. Does your girlfriend really love you? He said, oh yeah, man, she really does. I said, tell me about it. He waxed poetic for a minute. I interrupted him and said, now, tonight you are involved in a car wreck, sir. Your handsome face is totally scarred. Your body is totally rearranged. Is she still going to love you tomorrow? And the dude said, yeah. I said, okay, my man, according to Jesus Christ, she's ready to make a lifelong commitment to you, to really love you, which is not just infatuation. It's not just excitement. It's not just convenience. She is ready to love you, to seek your highest good, to give herself to you, and to make a lifelong commitment. But you, my man, are just using her.
outside of the Gospels themselves.
Right.
There aren't any non-Christian articles or that much in that area that would confirm that outside of what was written by the faithful, those who already were of the mentality that was what happened, that was the historical fact of the incident.
Okay. But the most famous person of Jesus' day was Tiberius Caesar. Within a period of 150 years, 10 people wrote about Tiberius Caesar. Within a period of 150 years of Christ, 42 people wrote about Jesus Christ. So certainly we're not going to try and maintain that there's little historical evidence regarding Christ. There's a ton of historical evidence about Christ.
It's kind of like a game of telephone, though.
No. It's not telephone, Because we've got over 5,000 Greek manuscripts or pieces of manuscript of the Gospels, agreeing to an infinitesimal degree. It's not telephone, man. This is historically reliable information passed down over 2,000 years.
I don't know. I am kind of the belief, though, that no document can be completely reliable, especially the farther back that you go
Okay.
from it, because especially text is written with a given objective, and it's usually to persuade someone to believe what they already believe, to tell people what they think is the truth. And if it's just one person's word, it's very difficult to verify that, especially the farther back you go from people actually having witnessed whatever it is they're talking about. I'm also not denying the possibility that what you're saying is all completely true, but I'm dubious of it because I can't.
All right, well, just be
actually
consistent.
grasp
Aristotle, Plato, Caesar, Tacitus, Thucydides, Herodotus. At the most, 20 extant manuscripts we possess of any one of their works. Time gap between when they wrote and the earliest manuscript, 700 to 1400 years. Jesus Christ, Gospels, written within 20 to 60 years of him, not 700 to 1400. First manuscript, John Rylands University Library, Manchester, England, fragment of the Gospel of John, chapter 18, dated 117 to 138 AD. That is 30 to 60 years after the writing. Very short gap, very close to the actual events recorded. You got to take it seriously. Sure, there could be errors, but the manuscript evidence, the date of the writing of the document, the gap between when it occurred and when it was written, the gap between when it is written and the first manuscript that we have, the New Testament is supported far more solidly than any other document of its time. So if you're going to be consistent with your tests, goodbye Aristotle, Plato, Caesar, Tacitus, Thucydides, Herodotus.
And it's entirely possible that all of those documents have as well undergone change, considering that they're all being transcribed and copied by people who could just as easily go in and alter a word here or there and morph the text in some way.
Anything's possible. The question is, what does the evidence point to? And I'm going to follow the evidence. I'm not just going to believe something because it's possible. The question is, what does the evidence point to? And the evidence is clear. Those documents are historically reliable. Based on manuscript evidence, archaeology, literary style, they're clear.
But what is there in terms of physical evidence, not just people's writings, but what actual objects exist from that period?
Well, what kind of object are you looking for?
I don't know. Is the cross that he was nailed to still around?
There's not much wood that was cut down, and
There are some really old pieces of wood that still exist, like stave churches. There are a lot less of them now because of people in Norway in the early 90s burning them, but...
right. No, I don't think we have the cross.
Also.
We don't have the cross.
Is there anything, though? Because there are a lot of other things from that period that are still around.
Well, sure. There's a ton of archaeological evidence that points us to the fact that Nazareth was a first-century Palestinian town.
Okay.
So was Bethlehem. John chapter 5, scholars used to think that, just an example of John making it up.
If I might add something, I'm not asking you this to dispute you, I'm asking this out of curiosity.
Good distinction. Thank you. The pool of Siloam, recorded in John chapter 5, where Jesus heals a paralyzed individual. It was thought, there's a mistake. There's no pool in Jerusalem surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. But several years ago, archaeologists uncovered that pool. It had a little stream coming down to it that was filled with a lot of dirt, and the mud piled up and the pool was covered, but archaeologists uncovered it. And all archaeology does is to verify the place names listed in those Gospels.
Although the existence of the building itself doesn't necessarily verify that that particular event happened there.
Correct.
It could just as easily, one example that comes to mind is there are a lot of very specific geographical locations in, say, Les Miserables. That doesn't necessarily mean that Jean Valjean actually went there.
Right. But the question is, are the Gospels historical fiction, which is a literary style? Well, historical fiction was not a literary style used in the first century.
There was a lot of exaggeration in a lot of historical documents from the period, usually biased towards those who had written it. Like if you look at the account of any battle from that period, what the winners of the battle would say had happened was usually a lot more violent and glorious to them than what, say, those left over from the conquered would say happened. They might have thought that was actually what happened, but that doesn't necessarily make it so.
Well, historical fiction was not a literary style until hundreds of years after the first century.
Not explicitly.
Right.
Mythology was.
Yeah, exactly. And so the question is, are the Gospels mythology in their literary genre? And it's rather clear from reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that they're not mythology.
Well, I would say one thing that is morally absolute is causing undue harm to others, or believing an innate superiority in one people over another. I would believe that would be immoral. And so Hitler's actions were immoral because he killed millions of people and because he believed Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, etc. to be inferior to the Aryan race.
Okay, so you believe that there's a moral lawgiver?
I don't know if I'd say that. Are you asking if I believe that someone had to create these morals?
Well, obviously someone had to create the morals, right? So who creates the morals?
I think morals are a product of, one, our environment, and two, our an innate sense that we have. And I don't necessarily think that was given to us by a creator.
Okay, well then, in the innate sense that you have, does that tie you into an objective moral, or does it not?
It does.
Okay, so who creates and defines the objective moral that you hold to?
I think it's a product of evolution and time. I think, like, for instance, me knowing not to hurt another human being or not to murder another human being, that's something that society didn't need to teach me. That's something that I innately know as a human being, and I think that's a product of my brain in evolution, creating a species that knows it's not going to be able to survive if it kills everybody that it sees.
Okay, but if somebody else's brain, who has evolved to a different level than you, disagrees with what your brain tells you is moral, who is right, who is wrong?
Well, I would say that they are immoral, but that would actually be pointing out why morality is kind of an abstract thing, because sociopaths, for instance, don't have any sense of morality, and so in that sense, I guess morality would be a subjective, or I get the two confused actually, but not necessarily solid. You're relative. Yeah.
See, I'm convinced that if there is no God, morality has to be relative, because you can't have morality without a mind. And so if there is no God, there is no mind prior to the human mind, which means it's obviously the human mind that creates morality, if there is no God.
All right.
which means morality is totally relative, depending upon which human mind you're talking to.
Sure.
So that's why I don't understand why you're standing here saying what Hitler did was absolutely wrong.
Well, I think that, sure, I'm saying what Hitler's doing was wrong. I'm saying that from a relative moral standpoint.
Yeah.
And maybe I can't say that from an absolute moral standpoint.
Right.
If I can't, it's because an absolute moral standpoint doesn't exist. But
Exactly.
from a relative moral standpoint that I can define in saying that harming other people, etc., what I was saying earlier, I can say it's wrong.
Sure.
And in that, I don't see under what relative code you could say homosexuality is wrong.
Well, sir, if morality is relative, nothing is absolutely right, nothing is absolutely wrong. It's all relative.
Sure.
If that's your worldview, try and live it out. I don't think you're going to be able to. I think instead you're going to do exactly what you just did, which is say what Hitler did was absolutely wrong. Why? Because I'm convinced you do have a conscience. And I'm convinced that your conscience ties you into objective morals. Well, ask yourself, how can objective morals be real? Only if there is some type of moral lawgiver, some type of God to create and define those objective morals.
I don't think that they're necessarily I mean, just because there's not an absolute thing and that people can't say that there's an absolute wrong, there's something that society can agree upon. And even if society agrees upon the wrong thing, it doesn't necessarily mean it's right. But, sorry, I'm going to go back. Why do you say that it has to be a God?
Okay, I am convinced there has to be a God of some type because my experience of life is that if someone comes up to you and demeans you, or shoots you, or knifes you, I'm going to look them in the face and say, my conscience informs me that what you did to him is absolutely wrong. That was evil. When I look at Dachau and Auschwitz, I am convinced that is absolutely evil. Then I have to ask myself, how can there be a moral absolute? Only one way, if there is some type of God to create and define that moral absolute. So that is one of the pieces of evidence that points me to the existence of some type of God. Obviously, at this point in the discussion, Jesus Christ is irrelevant. We're not talking Jesus, we're talking God,
right.
Theism.
Of course. Well, like as I said, I would say that like the conscience that we have is a product of evolution, and if people break that mold of the conscience we have that says hurting other people, murdering other people is wrong, I mean, clearly we see that that's the outlier because we're saying that they're breaking the mold. The majority of people all the people here that have evolved have a conscience that tells them that murder is wrong, that hurting other people is wrong. And I would say that that's a product of evolution and not necessarily a product of a God that instilled that into us.
Good. Then in 1924, when Hitler writes Mein Kampf, when Hitler writes, it is imperative that we not slow down the process of evolution by intermingling with inferior races. That is why we must get rid of the Jewish people, because they are inferior, and we must support evolution, the upward spiral. That's his take on social Darwinism.
What way would God reveal himself to somebody who had no chance of ever and never would hear anything about Jesus Christ? How would he reveal himself to them as God? Or how would they know God?
Well, when you look at anthropology and history, obviously what has happened is God through creation has led people to realize, wow, there is a creator.
Okay.
Secondly, when you study anthropology, when you study people, what you see is deep within them, people have longed to know God.
Okay.
As G.K. Chesterton put it, The man who knocks on the door of a brothel is really looking for God. Meaning by that, I long for intimacy. I long for connection. I naturally ask the question, hey, anybody out there? Or am I alone in a cold, empty cosmos?
Okay.
We're hardwired in such a way
Right.
that we search for God.
Okay, so you ask the question. It's natural. I see exactly where you're coming from. But how do you get to know God? And I know you're going to say Jesus. But what if you never hear about him?
By his
The
Spirit,
message.
God draws you to himself. Abraham met a man named Melchizedek. Melchizedek knew God. He'd never heard about Yahweh Jehovah, who would reveal himself to Abraham.
So you can be a Christian without knowing anything about Jesus Christ.
That's right.
That's what you're saying.
You can know God without knowing Christ. That's right. Abraham did, Moses did, Rahab did, Noah did.
But does that mean, so can you just relinquish everything we've been talking about the truths of what Jesus did and his resurrection? None of that matters at all anymore.
Oh, no.
You just said that that you can
No,
be a Christian
Thomas, what I
without
told you,
Christ.
sir, is I've had the privilege of meeting Thomas. If I say, goodbye, we ain't talking anymore, I can do that and walk away. And I still have some knowledge of Thomas. But if I really want to develop a relationship with you, if I'm genuine in wanting to be your friend, I'm going to have to spend time with you. I'm going to have to listen, interact, build a relationship.
Okay.
That's the way we will deepen our knowledge of each other.
Okay, and you're saying that we do that through Christ.
Exactly.
God.
Christ is God opening up and saying, here's more truth about me.
You've had this conversation about objectivism and subjectivism, and the world's subjective. You can't blame anyone for stealing someone else's sandwich because it's biochemical.
Right.
And then you said, so your argument was that an objective morality exists, and in order for an objective morality to exist, there must be a God which decrees that.
Right.
Because if the objective morality, it is not possible for there to be an objective morality which is based purely on personal experience.
Well, the way I would say it is that
Yeah, say
I'm
it
right
how
with
you
you until
say
the final
it.
statement. What I would say is, in order to have morality, you have to have a mind.
Right.
You know, inanimate matter cannot define right versus wrong. You have to have a mind. So if there is no mind prior to the human mind, then it's obviously the human mind that creates right and wrong, which means it's all relative depending upon which human mind is creating the right and wrong.
Yeah. And so I was talking to you, and I was saying that I believe in objective morality. I believe that racism is wrong. It's subjectively wrong. We had this conversation, and I thought that I was wondering whether I could just believe maybe in human dignity and start from that. And you said that we need a God. What could you explain why we need a
You
God
bet.
to everyone?
Okay, now if I believe that you are simply a cosmic accident and I'm simply a cosmic accident, that we all are simply cosmic accidents, there is no such thing as dignity. Dignity is an intangible value. Dignity you cannot measure in a test tube.